single, sharp, mechanical click echoes through the empty town square, followed by a silence so profound it feels like the world has been muted. Then you notice it. Every single timepiece, your watch, the blinking oven display, the bank's digital sign, has stopped dead at that exact same moment. The cold, damp night air clings to your skin, carrying the faint, sickly sweet odor of something rotting from the nearby woods. You try your phone, but the screen is a solid, unresponsive black, reflecting only your own wide-eyed stare back at you. From down the deserted street comes a sound, not a voice, but a low, wet scratching, like claws dragging slowly over brick. A primal, gut-deep dread coils in your stomach, freezing the air in your lungs. This isn't a power outage, this is a theft. Something has reached into our reality and stolen a single, precise slice of time from an entire community, leaving us all trapped in the same eternal, silent moment. And whatever took it is still here. 3:07 a.m. The hour became a curse. Now imagine being commanded, with absolute finality, to never alter them again. The air thickened with ozone and the faint metallic tang of iron. A low, persistent scratching began behind the wall. As the command settled into bone, in Miller's Hollow's town square, the clock tower's hands remained frozen, a silent sentinel against the night. A frantic hand reached for a radio clock's dial, then froze mid-air, fingers trembling. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and damp stone, pressing in like a physical weight. This wasn't a power outage. It was a rule. And in Miller's Hollow, breaking it meant you'd never leave. To an outsider, Miller's Hollow is postcard perfect, but that perfection is a thin veneer. A faint coppery scent drifts on the breeze, the smell of old pennies and damp earth. The streets are too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears strain. This isn't peace, it's the stillness before something wakes. But newcomers Sarah and Mike Evans learned their first rule immediately. When their truck arrived at the quaint Victorian, neighbor John wasn't holding a welcome pot. He clutched a heavy toolbox, its metal surface gleaming dully in the fading light. The air carried the scent of old wood and damp earth as he stood silently watching. John, his face etched with decades of hard living, stood on Sarah and Mike's porch, the rain-slicked wood creaking under his weight. He leveled a rusted screwdriver, not it down, but at their wall clock, its brass casing dull. "It's set to 3:07, he stated, his voice gravelly and final. "You leave it that way." Mike, younger and skeptical, could only manage a tense whisper, "Is this some town-wide prank?" Quote, as the heavy scent of damp earth and ozone clung to the air. "A hazing ritual for the new folks?" John leaned closer, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "The clock on your stove, your car radio, your phone. You'll find they all default to the same thing here. Don't resist. Surrender to it." Sarah, "Why? What happens then?" The response wasn't a voice, but a sudden, metallic scent of ozone that coated her tongue. Every hair on her arms lifted as a dry, papery whisper seemed to rustle from the walls themselves. John fixed Sarah with an empty, distant stare, then turned and walked away without a word. Sarah felt the atmosphere thicken with an unspoken dread, while Mike dismissed it as local superstition. But the evidence was absolute and impossible to ignore. Every public clock, the bank, the library, the train station, was mechanically frozen at precisely 3:07. The digital clocks would glitch, reset, and inevitably return to that same cursed hour. Sarah, "Quite a quirky tradition you have here with the clocks." Her words hung in the air, a thin veneer of normalcy over the creeping dread. The waitress's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a grim, hollow expression. "It's not a tradition, hon," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the still air. "It's a maintenance job." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "We're just maintaining the client." Her final words carried the scent of stale coffee and something metallic underneath. The quiet was the second thing Sarah registered. Miller's Hollow possessed its own unsettling soundscape. After dusk fell, no birdsong ever broke the stillness. Not even the familiar rasp of crickets disturbed the void. A persistent electrical hum blanketed the town, broken only by a faint, rhythmic scraping that seemed to emanate from the abandoned limestone quarries after midnight. In his home office, Mike tapped his laptop keyboard in frustration as the screen glitched violently, the time display snapping back to 3:07 a.m. With a grunt of irritation, he reached into a dusty box and pulled out a vintage wristwatch, a final gift from his grandfather. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of ozone and old paper as the watch's second hand began to move against his will. With a defiant smile, Mike wound the mechanical timepiece and set its hands to 2:30 p.m. He was a man of logic, a fixer, for whom a broken clock presented not a mystery, but a problem awaiting his solution. A faint, metallic scent of ozone began to taint the air as the mechanism engaged. The steady tick-tock that filled the room felt less like time passing and more like a countdown. His defiance was a minuscule, metronomic rebellion. Scene. That night, 3:07 a.m. precisely. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The air thickened, turning frigid and dense. The house's familiar ambient hum vanished completely. It was replaced by that same, persistent scraping sound. Now it emanated not from the distance, but from just outside, In the backyard. She shook Mike, but he was lost in an unnaturally deep sleep, his body heavy and unresponsive. Turning toward the window, a sudden scent of damp earth and ozone filled the air. Peering out, the moonlit backyard stretched before her, bathed in an eerie silver glow. Her breath caught. The oak tree's shadow didn't match its form, twisting in impossible angles against the grass. The thing was impossibly long and thin, writhing against the wind's current. It twitched violently, then scraped against the garage siding like a petrified bone claw. At dawn, Mike discovered deep, parallel gouges etched into the siding, their substance pale and crumbling like ancient limestone. His watch, meticulously set, now read 3:07. Its ticking the only sound in the heavy morning air. The mechanism hummed with unnatural warmth beneath Sarah's trembling fingers. Inside John's workshop, she found dozens of half-finished timepieces, their brass hands frozen at 3:07. The scent of ozone and old pine hung thick in the air, and the only sound was the relentless drip of a leaky pipe. "What is it?" "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "What happens when the time is wrong?" John sighed, setting his chisel aside. "You think time is a river, flowing in one direction. But here, it's more like a stagnant pond. Something dwells in its murky depths." It stirred awake at 3:07 a.m. Back in 52. That was the night the quarry's shift whistle failed to blow. The air still carries the scent of damp stone and cold iron from that hour. Men were trapped below when the collapse sealed them in darkness. They were lost, completely cut off from the world above. But something else was down there with them, and it found them. We never give it a name. It slumbers in a fractured moment of time, a place where seconds stretch and snap. Our clocks are merely surface markers, buoys bobbing above its resting place. Disturb those markers, and the sleeping thing will stir. It arrives to correct the mistake. It follows the sound of wrong time, ticking, beeping, any rhythm that didn't match its own. Mike dismissed it all as nonsense. He clung to rational explanations. A geological anomaly, mass hysteria. Yet the air felt thick, carrying a faint, metallic scent that logic couldn't explain. To prove his theory, he drove to the abandoned quarry as dusk settled. He carried his grandfather's watch, frozen in time, and a digital metronome app set to a precise 1-second interval, a rhythm alien to Miller's Hollow's perpetual 3:07. The air carried the scent of damp earth and rusted metal, cold and clinging to his skin. He started the metronome. Its steady, artificial tick echoed unnaturally against the quarry's stone walls. Then, from the depths below, a faint scratching sound began to answer each beat. Before him, a vast, dark maw in the earth yawned open. He placed the watch on a nearby rock and started the metronome app. Tick, tick, tick. The mechanical rhythm sliced through the stillness, obscenely loud. Mike's voice was barely a whisper in the heavy air. See? Nothing. Just stories. The temperature plummets. A metallic scent of ozone fills the space, sharp and electric. The tick-tick begins to echo, but not from his phone. The quarry walls seemed to exhale a cold, wet breath as the echoes fractured around him. The rhythm of the place broke apart. Tick, tick, T-I-C-K, tick. A disjointed, unnatural cadence. The limestone began to sweat a thin, gray slurry that carried the sharp, mineral scent of wet stone and something faintly metallic.
And in Miller's Hollow, every clock face began to weep a dark, viscous oil, as if time itself had been wounded. Sarah stared, breath-catching, as the number 3 on her wall clock melted into a single black tear. Across the room, John looked up from his workbench, his face leached of color. His voice was a hollow rasp. He's given it a trail to follow.
Back at the quarry, Mike's phone screen spider-webbed with cracks, the digital display flashing 3:07 in a frantic, silent alarm. Behind him, the quarry pit's shadows didn't just lengthen, they peeled from the stone, coalescing into a humanoid form of pure, crushing stillness. It didn't walk. Instead, the world around it snapped forward in sickening, jump-cut lurches. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and damp stone, pressing against his skin like a cold, wet blanket. A whispering static filled the space where sound should be, as primal dread took hold in his chest. It is the absence of correct time, and it's fixated on the ticking watch. The entity is upon him in a silent rush. Mike feels, not cold, but a profound nullity, the sensation of being erased from his own timeline. His last sight is the creature's face, a swirling, silent scream of trapped quarrymen, frozen at the moment of their death, superimposed over a glaring, phantom clock face. The first rays of morning sun cut through the lingering mist, revealing Miller's Hollow in an unsettling calm. Sarah stood wrapped in a blanket on John's porch, the heavy wool scratchy against her skin. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. Not a single bird sang, not a leaf stirred. The Hollow held its breath, waiting. She clutches Mike's grandfather's watch, its polished face gleaming under the faint light. The mechanism ticks with a soft, rhythmic precision, the hands frozen at 3:07. John's voice drops to a whisper, laced with a grim understanding. It took the source, left the beacon. It's sated. For now. Sarah's voice came out flat, hollow. Where is he? John's reply was a low rasp, heavy with dread. Gone. Into the wrong time. He's part of the quiet now. Weeks later, Sarah worked the diner's late shift, her apron stained with coffee and grease. The air smelled of burnt toast and stale cigarettes, a comforting, ordinary scent that felt like a lot. She served a young couple who just moved in, their voices bright with new house chatter. But beneath their laughter, Sarah felt the silence waiting. A thick, watchful stillness that clung to every surface. They gestured toward the clocks, chuckling about the quirk. A newcomer asked about all the timepieces, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. Sarah's eyes met John's across the space. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. She forced a thin, rehearsed smile, replying, "It's maintenance work. We're just preserving the quiet." In Sarah's bedroom, the night hung thick and motionless. Only the soft, insistent tick of Mike's watch on the nightstand cut through the heavy stillness. A faint, metallic scent, like cold iron, drifted on the unmoving air. The watch's luminous hands held the time in a silent, unwavering vigil. 3:07 a.m. Through the window, the oak tree's shadow remained motionless, frozen in the moonlit yard. But in the corner, where the rocking chair sat in darkness, its shadow moved. A slow, deliberate rhythm began back and forth, with no breeze to move it. The air thickened with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, like old coins, back and forth. On its own, a silent rhythm in a town of frozen time. A metallic scent, like cold iron, hangs in the damp air. The only sound is the faint, wet creak of the chair's joints against the worn floorboards. Narrator. In Miller's Hollow, we don't fear the dark. We dread the moment, that single, stretched second that refuses to end. We halt the clocks to keep it still, to hold back what waits in that elongated instant. Before you question your own town's peculiar rituals, consider what they're barricading outside. Ask what ancient dread they silence with their strange, little traditions. Or perhaps, what they're keeping asleep. The final click echoed like a lock sealing shut. A faint, acrid scent of ozone and damp stone seeped into the air. Every muscle in his body tensed, frozen by a sudden, instinctive dread, and stops. The world holds its breath. A metallic scent, like ozone and old copper, hangs thick in the unmoving air. Then, the slow, deliberate scrape of something heavy being dragged across a rough surface echoes from the blackness ahead. Fade to black.